knowledge construction, etc. And this is all tied back to those intercultural competencies, as again defined by Deardorff. We're looking to develop knowledge, skills, and attitudes, right? All three areas in this work that we're doing. And I know I'm moving quickly through this, but I wanted to make sure that I got to some specific examples for anybody who was with us last summer. I kept this one. This was from the student cultural photo introduction. And this was one of my students in the literature class, the Hispanic literature class, and we were COILing with students in Spain. And at my previous institution, I should probably say that about 90% of the students at my previous institution in West Virginia were from West Virginia, and even more specifically, the surrounding 8 or 9 counties. So there were very few out-of-staters, but Daniel was an out-of-stater, and he happened to be from Florida, and he happened to be from the Gulf Coast. And so in this cultural icebreaker activity, the idea is they share a picture of themselves that is not just a selfie. It somehow captures their cultural background, however they want to define that or express that. And then they write a short text that serves as an introduction to the group, but also explains a little bit about who they are and the image that they've chosen. So he talks about growing up on the Gulf Coast, the third coast as they call it, and he says, we're rich in saltwater and brackish water culture. We love to eat fresh food from local resources, lobster, crabs, alligator. The curricular activities, extracurricular activities with coastal life like fishing, skimming, beaching, boating, is all a part of what is that salt life culture. He says, I've lived in West Virginia for almost 4 years now. The culture is much different, but I'm embracing it here and have become fond of it as well. So he really sort of captured the spirit of the activity. There was a lot of discussion in the forum, a lot of responses to him, specifically about the different kinds of foods. But this is a great example of how that intro icebreaker might look. This is also for that first part of the COIL, another intro icebreaker, but a slightly different approach. So this was a psychology class working with, so a psychology class in the US working with a United States culture class in Mexico. And they agreed, the professors, to have the students create what they called a mundane collage. So the idea here was, think about your day-to-day life, capture it in 4 to 5 photos, and then just caption each of the photos and share that with the group. So this was submitted by one of the students in Mexico. And he says, the first image is where I walk every day. And then where I live, I can see the beautiful city of Puebla. The first thing I see when I wake up is a photo with my mom. Here's my beautiful university, and I live with my cousin. Right? So this was particularly helpful, I think, because these students were intermediate to advanced ESL students. So this didn't stretch them in ways to be really descriptive in writing too much at the beginning. They could use the photos and then just a little bit of text to communicate, introduce themselves. And again, this all of these posts generated quite a lot of good discussion in the forums. So once you are wrapping up your intro activities, I have some suggestions for how you make that transition to the next set of compare and contrast. So typically the intro activities have been happening with the entire group. And then at this point, you might consider making some changes and breaking into smaller groups. So typically, that's when you get down to teams of anywhere from 4 to 8 students. And I would just say, try to avoid a one-on-one combination. At least make 2 students from the US and 2 from a different country together in a group. That way, if somebody gets sick, if somebody just doesn't show up, there's a crisis, whatever happens, some of the work can still continue. And at that point, then assign a task that introduces them to the tech they'll need for their group project. So if you remember that ESL web design, this is when they had a personal interview using Zoom. Why did they do that? In part because they knew they wanted to use Zoom to have the business etiquette conversation. And so it helped them sort of prepare for the later activity. And then it's a good moment to select a topic that transitions from social to more academic. So that first week or two, they're getting to know each other, they have that socialization online, but then this is where you transition to, okay, now let's maybe start thinking specifically about higher ed in our respective countries, or now let's start thinking about health or business or whatever the topic is. And then that sets the stage for the group work that will happen later. As you develop these small groups, there are some things that I think you should consider. And so I've listed a few of them here, right? Which activities will include all students, if any, right? So if you have an intro activity that can include everybody, that's great. But maybe you want to start in small groups from the beginning, and that's fine too. But which activities should be for everybody? Which activities are better suited to be completed in those smaller groups? It's important that the students know which group they're in. So how will that information be communicated? And who's responsible? Is that you? Is that your partner? Is that you know, a Word doc that has all the groups clearly identified? Will the students be allowed to choose their own group? You know, some faculty have asked students to write down like 3 things that they really like, and then they sort of try to group people based on similar interests, right? So I mean, there are all kinds of ways to divide the class and spend some time with your partner discussing how you'd want to do that. And then what assistance will you provide in terms of facilitating communication with one another? At some point, we kind of want to step back as faculty and let the group establish some rules of communication, how they're going to divvy up the work. But at the same time, they need to know that you're there and that you can be called on for help and assistance. And so sort of making that clear from the beginning, your role, their role, what happens when the other side is not responding? What should, you know, what do you do, right? Having that conversation ahead of time is really helpful. And that can prevent some really ugly misunderstandings, right, from developing during the COIL work itself. So I know we're about up on time, and what I've put together on this final slide then is just kind of a recap in terms of six steps, excuse me, to getting started. So the first one here, it's going to be important for you and your partner, whoever you're working with, to know you both need to have a certain amount of knowledge about one another's institution. So you're an expert on Florida, but you need to kind of learn basic profile information about your partner's institution as well. And that's helpful in terms of explaining to your own students prior to the COIL work, you know, sort of who these students are, where they're coming from, institution type, etc. At the same, after that, right, after kind of getting that general info, familiarizing yourself with institutional policies and procedures. And I mention this because the example that I always use is my partner in Spain. She couldn't make changes to certain courses in terms of syllabi. It was sort of built into local sort of, it's not state, but province law, right? And those things couldn't change. They were on like a 2 to 3 year cycle. And it was also really difficult for her to make any changes to a grading scale. So we had to kind of, I had to learn about these challenges for her, and we had to sort of creatively think about how we could develop the COIL module and have it still be assessed and count for something. even though certain policies on her end were much more rigid than they were for me. Establish guidelines for your team interactions. We've talked about this in the student context, but it's also really important for faculty to think about doing this as well. In my experience, when COILs fall apart or when COILs don't work especially well, it usually can be traced back to communication problem at the faculty level. Sometimes it's at the student level, but faculty too, right? Well, you know, I didn't hear back, or I didn't want to be a pest, or you know, I wasn't getting the information that I needed, right? So if you and your partner have the conversation early about how quickly will we respond to emails, when do we move from email to maybe a weekly Zoom check-in? What needs to be covered via Zoom, via text, via email, right? Having that conversation ahead of time is just really helpful in terms of making that partnership as effective as possible. We've already mentioned and talked about the planning with backward design, and then assess your technology strengths and weaknesses. So like in my case, my partner, basically they used Moodle at her institution, and she had only ever used Moodle to post a syllabus. That was it. So I was a little more familiar with LMSs, and I said, okay, look, I'll take it on. I will build the different units in Moodle. You don't have to do that, but I need you to provide me the language that we're going to use for instructions for this activity. So you give me that, I'll get it in there. You don't have to worry about anything within the Moodle, but we're working together based on our own strengths and weaknesses. And then familiarize yourself with the tech tools. There may be, you know, there are all kinds of tools out there. Institutions are using Padlet, they're using Google. In some cases, I know of COILs that have happened entirely via email or entirely on Facebook. So it's, you're going to be sort of inundated with options, but you may not know how to use all of those. And so it'll be important for you to, you know, if this is the tool you need, and you don't really know how to use it, to connect with people who can help you, because guaranteed your students are going to come to you to say, oh, I don't know how to fix this glitch. And if you've already kind of worked through that process and can help them with it, it speeds things up instead of having to sort of run everybody through the main IT office, although that's an option as well, right? So this would be 6 quick steps, right, to getting started. There is a lot in each one of these steps. What I've been working on most recently is sort of developing like a 3 to 6 week sort of online training course for faculty, where they have the time with their partner to work on all of these 6 steps together and to do some of the design together, so they end the training with their about half of their module complete. So I've thrown a lot at you. I'm going to stop, so I'm respectful of everybody's time, and I'm looking forward to question and answer when we move to that.
All right, thanks, Megan. That was great. I think we're going to quickly transition into Jackie Salmon, who I thought it'd be good to have an FGCU example of someone who relatively recently started out with a COIL project last year in the fall, just to give an idea of what her experience was in New Zealand. So, Jackie, I believe you can share your screen if you want to, or begin speaking.
That's okay. I'm not going to share my screen today because Megan gave us perfect examples, basically all of the things that I would have shared anyway. So, you know, in the interest of time, I'll just talk through sort of what I did for the COIL process. So I collaborated with somebody in New Zealand, somebody I didn't know. So a major part of this collaboration process was me getting to know the faculty partner that I was collaborating with. And we brought together two kind of groups of students. He teaches a sustainability course, and all of his students are, you know, learning about sustainability 100%. I teach the colloquium course here at FGCU. So my students are from a variety of disciplines, and they're sort of learning about sustainability for kind of one semester only in some cases. So both of our aims, my personal kind of course objective or a learning objective for the students was based on a global perspective on sustainability. And that happened to co-align with what he was hoping to achieve for his students. So his students on the sustainability side had a lot of information, but he wanted them to gain more of a kind of global perspective. So I'd gone through the training process last summer with Megan, and obviously my ideas of what I wanted to achieve with COIL were like this big. The reality of it, when you kind of get talking with somebody else and you figure out what's going to fit in with their course and their students, things shrunk a little bit. So I'd kind of consider what I did as a sort of pilot COIL or a mini COIL, if that exists. So one of the things that we decided to do when we had our interactions, we did lots of emailing backwards and forwards, and something Megan just said about setting up expectations for email is a key thing. I'm a real email person. I email people back pretty quickly, usually within a couple of hours. My collaborator, Dave Irwin, his name's Dave, over in New Zealand, he's a much more casual emailer, so he wouldn't get back to me for like 4 or 5 days. So exactly what Megan was talking about, this kind of, you know, I'm thinking, is he not interested? Is what I've said to him as an idea not really working out for him? So establishing some kind of guidelines before you move forward would have been a really good idea. I didn't do that, but it would have been good if I'd have done that. And then we moved on to bi-weekly COIL meetings at the beginning of summer, and then we did weekly COIL meetings between the two of us to set up what we wanted to do. So we skipped the intro portion of the COIL idea. We felt that because of the time scale, his students in New Zealand started much earlier while our students weren't even in session. So we decided that we would skip the intro section. I have to say that after we'd completed the COIL collaboration with our students, all of our students, and us, all agreed that an introduction would have been a really good thing to do. So, you know, learn from mistakes here. We thought it was something we could kind of skip over and just get to the meat of the academic stuff, but we missed it. The students really missed that kind of interaction. They continued it on after we'd done our collaboration, and they stayed in contact via Facebook. I'd set up a Facebook subgroup for them, and they were all talking to each other on that. And I checked back in with it a while back, and they were all talking about what's happening with COVID-19. So the continuation of this sort of global collaboration was something that they, you know, had after the event. It would have been much more useful to have incorporated the standard COIL introduction. But as I say, this is a collaborative process, and kind of what I wanted to achieve and how I was seeing things wasn't quite the same as with what Dave saw this being. Part of that is because obviously I'd gone through a COIL training and he hadn't. So again, my advice to you, if you're joining in with a partner that hasn't done one of these trainings, pass on information that you've gained. I felt a little bit kind of weird doing that. I didn't really want to sort of train somebody else on something that I didn't know what I was doing myself. So it feels a little bit awkward, but I think that would have been really much more helpful. Times afterwards, I met with Dave. I went to New Zealand and we sat down and talked over dinner, and then, it was almost like after the event, he got a much better idea of what I'd wanted to achieve from the beginning. So, this is kind of how things go, right? But what we ended up doing, we had our students together, Dave and myself came up with a set of questions that fitted in with key aspects of sustainability that we thought would be important for students to kind of brainstorm, bash out, and come up with solutions for. So we had them separate up into groups, and we had them do synchronous activities. So with the time difference, this was a challenge. My students did it in the evening, his students were early in the morning. And we had synchronous sessions. We sat down, the students were given the questions and the kind of thought pieces ahead of time, and they were supposed to relate the topics to their local experience. So we focused on climate change, pollution, and water issues. And the students that met in the groups both had the same set of questions. They thought about what they wanted to talk about before they met up. We had a synchronous Zoom session, again, at a time when people didn't know what Zoom was. Now, of course, everyone's like, oh, Zoom, yeah, I know Zoom. But at the time, this was kind of, everyone's like, what is this Zoom thing? So the students met together. Dave and I were both in the room, but we didn't get involved. We sort of set everything up and let the students debate and control things from their perspective. We just kind of sat back and observed. And let them kind of discuss things, share ideas, discuss how they would solve the particular problems that were related to their particular issues. And then after that process, the students in the groups went back to their classrooms, respective classrooms, and shared their experiences of what had happened. So at the time, we weren't comfortable doing it with 25 students. So we did it with smaller groups, as I say, synchronously. So we wanted to make sure that the other students that were in the classroom that hadn't been involved in that session got to know something about that session. I also recorded both sessions and made them available through Canvas, and Dave made his available to his students in New Zealand. I'm not sure if any students actually watched the videos and, you know, saw what we discussed. I think personally for my group, the in-class discussion afterwards, talking about, you know, what they'd learned. So for example, with water issues, so many of the issues we face in Southwest Florida in terms of the algae blooms and things like that are repeated in Christchurch, New Zealand. So it's a really, really great introduction to how sort of local and global these sustainability issues are. So something that affects a place locally very majorly is doing the same thing, you know, thousands and thousands of miles away. And to sort of solve these problems, we need both local and global solutions. So students were coming up with the solutions to this in their groups collaboratively, and then sharing them with class afterwards, and discussing things with the class afterwards, additional ideas, that sort of thing. So for us, this was kind of, this was just the mini project we did. I'd wanted students to work a little bit more in depth, but again, given the differences with semester timelines and things like that, it didn't work out this time. But I'm hoping that my continuation of COIL will lead to a much more structured sort of COIL, where the students will actually work more closely on a project and come up with some solutions. So mine was literally just kind of a little taster, if you like, of a kind of COIL experience. So I'm going to pass it back to Matt to you know, field us for questions and things like that.
All right, thanks for relating that experience, Jackie. That's pretty cool. I had a quick question. How did you first connect with Dave, or is it Dave Irwin?
Yeah, Dave. So never met him before. I was at a conference in Paris talking about collaboration that I do with another faculty member on campus, where he has his design students collaborate with my students in my colloquium class, and at this conference about this collaboration. And, you know, I'd said at the time, this was before the COIL thing had started, I just said, I'm open to collaborations with anyone. If anyone's interested in doing anything, please talk to me. And afterwards, a gentleman came and talked to me who was from the ARA Institute in Christchurch, where Dave works. It was actually his kind of, you know, dean, if you like, his boss. And so I was talking to George, get going with something? What can we get going? And then once the COIL thing came up and I said, right, okay, I've got an idea of what I want to do. How can, where do we go from here? He said, hey, I've got this guy, Dave, who'd be really interested in doing this. And so that was it. So never met Dave before, didn't know him before. And so my entire experience has been getting to know Dave virtually, which was really great because that's what our students get to do, right? When they're collaborating with these students elsewhere, they're doing the same thing. So all of the uncomfortableness, I went through the same process that our students go through. So, and now I'd consider Dave one of my firm friends. So.
All right. Yeah, because faculty connect in various ways. Sometimes faculty have already known each other through other previous connections. There's some, they're kind of similar to like dating websites where you can go on. I think COIL has one where you can go on and try to find a faculty that matches what you're looking for. And our office can always be used as a resource, and we can, I'm actually helping Lois right now try to find someone in Austria to help her with something she has in mind. So there's a lot of ways to find that connection, and or you might already have one. We'll see. I just wanted to check with Mary to see if anything that she, with her experience, that she would want to add, or maybe didn't get mentioned, or want to emphasize that Megan or Jackie talked about, or.
Sure. I actually, Jackie, did you do this in the fall or spring? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Oh, I did mine in the fall. So I was in the summer training, and you talked in summer. So I got to hear some of your experiences in summer too.
Right. I just asked because I actually had something structured for the spring semester. And thanks to COVID, it's not that it didn't happen, but I spent so much time working with actually 2 faculty partners in Thailand, doing something on sustainability as well, specifically looking at social sustainability in a variety of ways. But it was interesting because during COVID, first of all, to get consistent responses was very tough, even from our students, which of course I understood completely. But it was fascinating because they didn't want to talk about social sustainability. They wanted to talk about why Americans wouldn't wear their masks, and is that something cultural? They wanted to talk about protests. They want to talk about racial inequality, police brutality. And it was amazing. It was a little bit disconnected and all over the place. But I know for me, that really, I feel like I want to write something about this because we spent so much time structuring this so it would be so consistent. But it was such a great thing, right? Because we have these students in Asia, we have these students here who are talking about these things that are literally unfolding as we're talking about it. So it was so hard for me because to assess that was going to be nearly impossible because it's not what we structured. But the real learning and the real discussion actually came out of that more informal, as much as we tried to keep them on task, it wasn't compelling to them. Like no offense, they didn't care about the environment and they didn't care about people's relationship to it. They just wanted to talk about the news and, what they were seeing in the media. So I guess something I'm trying to think about, and maybe Megan or Jackie or, all of you, really, everyone on here has some experience or expertise, is how to structure it, but still allow for those kind of impromptu, to still be flexible, because I found myself kind of getting annoyed because I was like, no, I mean, I'm so glad you want to talk about that, but this is what we're supposed to be doing. And so, I think that is one of the challenges, is especially as a sociologist, because things are literally happening sometimes outside of our plans. And so if anyone has thoughts on, I mean, COVID has been so terrible, but such a, as far as like social change and social issues, it's just been such an amazing kind of discussion opportunity and exchange opportunity. So I guess that's that's where I'm at right now, just listening to all of this, is how do I have a plan and coordinate that with others who aren't here, right? And virtually, and how do I allow for if the plan needs to change? Yeah, anyone can.
I think Delphine wanted to say something. You're muted still though. Oh, I don't, Matt, can you unmute her?
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
Hey, Duffy.
First, thank you for everybody. I'm really interested in COIL, but I had two questions. One related in a way to what Mary was just talking about, which has to do with how do you account for technology disparity? How can you still have those meaningful things, but being aware of economic privileges and economic difficulties and how that plays a role? Because that's something with COVID that I really saw the impact on my students that did not have the same access to technology once they were no longer on campus. And so, and the same way, I grew up in France, and I know a lot of us did not have access to technology or did not respond to emails. You know, there is a completely different culture of technology access, but also the question of is economic disparity. So how do you still have those meaningful moments, but taking into consideration economic disparity, particularly in times of COVID, I think would be my first question.
I think I'll pass that on to Megan, but I would say one thing that Megan mentioned is coming up with the goals and the objectives first, and then going to see how the technology can help and trying to keep it as simple as possible in terms of technology. I think the biggest issues that we had with all of our first cohort was the time difference. And that doesn't touch on exactly what you're saying, but the idea is coming up with creative ways to be asynchronous, whether that's blogs, and also I would say the preparation before the COIL implementation starts with the two professors to see exactly where the students stand, what resources they have at the university, and discuss those things in the lead up.
Yes, I agree, Matt. That's where I was going to start. If you express that concern and have that conversation early on, some of the COIL activities can be completed with just a smartphone. And that's assuming that everybody has a smartphone. I know not everybody does, but you can be very intentional in the design of activities that could, not put a strain on the students necessarily, if that's a concern and that's a problem. So, we have people who have partners in certain places in Africa, certain places in Latin America where, bandwidth is a problem, electricity even is a problem. And, cases where students are logging in at 12 or 1 or 2 in the morning because that's when they've got access to electricity and they're trying to upload a video. Well, don't assign a video. Right, figure out it, right, so you can, that's part of the getting to know your partner, designing activities that will be that will allow your students to have success, right? So I know that only partially kind of answers your question. I do want to also mention, in response to Mary's question, I have seen pretty successful building into the COIL space, wherever that is, in an LMS or Padlet or Trello, wherever it is, what people call a cafe. And so that's just like a place where students can pop in and chat. You might as an instructor see in a forum that the conversation is starting to go off on that tangent, right? And you could say, you know what? That's really interesting. I'm going to put that, I'm going to copy and paste that into the cafe. And why don't you discuss there, right? So I don't know if that could be helpful, Mary, but I have seen more and more instructors specifically create a space that can be more social in the COIL collaboration, so that when you say, hey, this is where we need to do this academic piece that we structured, it can still happen.
I had a question.
Shoot.
Go ahead. Sure.
Okay. So I was wondering what the process is if you're interested in collaborating with someone. Is the training offered every semester or what? I don't even know much about this.
Matt, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think a good first step is, you're already going to come to the table with some ideas that you might have, and I'm sure that both Jackie and Megan have spurred some ideas that got your wheels turning a little bit. And I would say a good first step would be maybe we can discuss, set up an appointment. Our office would be open for that, to discuss like what the next steps would be. What area, did you have a region of mind, what you want to teach, think about objectives. And I think one thing I learned was kind of, and I don't know if Jackie will agree with me, she kind of alluded to this on what she was saying, is start kind of small and look for the little victories. And I'm sure she learned a lot in that first semester that is going to help her towards the second semester, like emphasizing introductions more often.
Okay.
But every COIL looks very different. They're very, some might only meet once synchronously, maybe not at all synchronously. Maybe they'll have the whole semester together, maybe just a short 2-week module. It's across the board, and it's up to the two faculty to determine. So, so I would just say keep our office and myself open as a resource to kind of search for those next steps as they come up.
Great. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what Matt said. Sorry, I'll let you go
No,
in a
it's
second.
fine.
I'll echo what Matt said about learning a lot through the first kind of iteration of things. So, I had all these grand ideas and all these things, and I'd been working on all this stuff behind the scenes, and then the reality of it kicks in, right? So, having something where you say, okay, this is fine. It's okay if we just do this, and not to feel sort of frustrated by that. And going on from what Marie was talking about, my students were pre-COVID, so they didn't want to talk about COVID necessarily, but they did want to talk about our president. So there was a lot of that was going on. So we kind of set aside, I steered the conversation once, I had to do it, steered it back, and then when we'd finished our academic portion, students literally turned to me and said, can we talk about other things now? And so we let them have like a kind of synchronous sort of 20 minutes talking about random other things that was just for fun. But I can see that in the current situation with the current global issues that are going on, it would be really hard to keep students on academic track. I would probably have just given up and let them talk about something else, but that's probably not a good thing to say.
I would also say that cultural literacy, like a basic training before the class starts. I mean, you're gonna have all levels of how culturally intelligent the students are coming into it, but a precursor, whether it's a workshop, we have a workshop on Canvas out of our office, but we can trim that down to like a 45-minute session where we discuss it. But basically teaching the students to manage their emotions when they're navigating with people that are culturally different than themselves, and also just to limit, judgments that have any value to them. And that would help, some of these discussions in the introductory, if it goes really well and they're communicating, you could come up with some real cultural issues and problems. Although it's success if they're really communicating, they're going back and forth, even if it's unrelated to the topic. But we want to make sure that the students are going into it with some cultural literacy knowledge to avoid.
And I would also like to point out, even if they're both speaking English, which my group were, there's still a wealth of cultural difference that is there, and a wealth of language difference, words that are used in New Zealand and Britain that aren't used. So, my students had almost like a triangle of cultural issues to deal with. So they had to deal with my British background, the New Zealand background, and the American background. So even if it's an English language collaboration, bear in mind that you still have to be aware of differences and be ready to kind of jump in when students suddenly looked like really confused when one of the New Zealand students had asked them a question, embarrassed and got all awkward because they didn't understand what was being asked, because it was a cultural terminology for New Zealand that I didn't necessarily understand. So that was a learning moment for all of us. But again, to sort of tell students that this is okay. This is, even if we're both speaking English, we're both speaking very different versions of English.
Can I just add too, that's such a good point, Jackie, as far as the different, what's kind of accepted in different cultures and even terminology. For me, during this kind of COVID unraveling, one of the issues that I didn't foresee was one of my faculty partners in Thailand, because what's acceptable in Thailand is very, very different than what's acceptable, especially to say, and, you know, certain phrases. And but one of the faculty partners actually said some things that the students found very offensive. And so that was a shock to me, because I think I just assumed that all faculty are going to avoid that type of thing. And so that turned into a whole other discussion with the students about culture and, you know, how to handle when someone from a different culture might say something that, you know, you don't find acceptable. And, you know, it was like a whole, I think I could design a whole course just on that now. But I thought that that might come from some of the students, but to come from one of the faculty partners was actually turned into another learning piece of the experience. So, yeah.
I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead, Lois.
First of all, thank every one of you for this. This is unbelievable. I also wanted to comment to Delphine. I teach at a elementary level. I taught at an elementary level. I've decided not to go back to that. But the disparity between the economic disparity and the lack of availability for computer usage or IT usage. And Matt, you and I have talked about this too. That's why I use blogs, which solve an enormous amount of problems. Also, I was going to take this, before I attended this COIL, I was going to take this to a Fulbright level. I've actually prepared to move forward with that, but this is what I want to do first to establish a connection in Austria. And this has been very helpful to see what you're all doing. It's very, very impressive. So congratulations.
I have a question, and first of all, thank you. Like Lois said, it's amazing what you guys are doing, and maybe Jackie or Megan can answer. I'm curious about the students' perspective. What's their feedback once the course was done? What did they say? I know Jackie mentioned something about the introduction video, and Megan mentioned something about the differences in time, but anything else that you heard from them in terms of feedback?
Certainly from my perspective, my students loved what they did. They thought it was really, really useful. They were stunned about the kind of the academic stuff that they learned, but also the sort of personal things that they learned, like what's normal in New Zealand, in Christchurch, compared to what's normal here. So even though we didn't do a formal introduction, we're still talking about, you know, well, here it's normal to walk, you know, and we don't drive to school, we walk to school, and we walk to eat, and all these kinds of things. So students were getting to exchange this sort of normal behaviors, the norms that they have in their society. And so all of these things students said were really useful. I did a sort of semi-structured assessment of the COIL, and I'm aiming to continue on with this. I compared the essays that were written. Luckily, I had a cohort of students in my other colloquium class that hadn't been involved in the COIL. So I compared the essays that were written by the non-participants and the participants. And I also compared the discussions that we had in class after the COIL participation had finished in terms of internationalized language. So I was specifically looking for students to be talking about things. Normally, when students are in class and I'm asking them to think about sustainability issues, they just think about the US, you know, usually just Florida. And I'm lucky if I can get them to see beyond Florida. And so I compared it, and I found that there was a significant uptick on the amount of kind of global language students were using, and just a global awareness that these issues exist outside of, you know, their own kind of backyard. So I consider that a success. It's something that would need to be much more structured to be, you know, to come up with a sort of academic justification. But certainly students said they enjoyed the process, they wanted more of it. So we did ours over a 4-week period. When we do it again, we're hoping to do it over a 6-week period. But yeah, and certainly also from the New Zealand side, Dave had a debrief in his classes too. And he said his students thought it was really useful. And it was out of the debrief that they said, we really wanted to do introductions. That would have been really helpful, and that would have been a really great thing. So the introduction thing that we decided to skip over, not just Dave and I deciding that we shouldn't have skipped over it, but the students themselves were the ones that said, we really want to do that. So next time we know that that's something we'd be doing. So for me, the students loved it, and I'm, you know, chomping at the bit to get back and do more of it. Megan, you've had way more experience than me, and Marie, you've had way more experience.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. I think by and large, what I hear from students is we want more. And I'll give you a couple of specific examples of other takeaways, right? So a student in West Virginia wrote in a reflection, I'm not much of a reader. I don't really like to read, but I found that this COIL work had me interested in the topic in a way I've never been interested before. And I was reading everything and participating in class in a way that I normally do not. I've had students who are very quiet in my class who suddenly take on this like a larger than life personality in the COIL space. You know, they don't say anything in the in-person class, but they're very vocal, and they're very, they're participating constantly in that COIL space. The students in Spain, who some of them were they were studying translation. And they said, you know, this is the first time that I've been able to work on translating a piece from Spanish to English with a native English speaker to help in some of that process. And then finally, we had a student who started, she was in the my very first, just like Jackie, that weird pilot class that was kind of bizarre and all over the place, but like it accomplished something. She took that class, and then she wanted to complete her studies initially in Madrid with a study abroad in Madrid. She changed her mind, went to Oviedo, Spain instead, because she had COILed with students in Oviedo, had connections there, liked what she'd seen and learned about the city. And so she was our first, within 2 years of starting the COIL work at that institution, we saw our first study abroad directly connected to the COIL work. And she went to a place that was much better for her for sort of that cultural immersion anyway, right? So those, I mean, I have all kinds of examples. I think those hit on the things that we've discussed. So yes, they always usually say, how can we do more of this? And even one last, I know I said I was gonna stop and then I'm not, criminal justice major who was taking a COIL class, or his COIL was in a history gen ed requirement, but he was a criminal justice major. He said, how could we get this into a CJ course? Because this is awesome, right? So that's the kind of feedback that I've had over the years.
Yeah, I think a huge success would be if a COIL developed into a study abroad. And I know, even as Delphine mentioned, there's economic issues there per student, but I mean, me and Michael McDonald have discussed that if a COIL somehow can turn into a future study abroad, and the funding, you know, it's a little bit of funding, but you know, hopefully we'll get more and more funding for study abroad as it comes. That's going to be a priority. If we can have a COIL develop into an interpersonal experience, that's where we would like to put any funding that we have for study abroad from the university or the foundation there. And I'd also like to see Jafar joined us late. And I'd also like to discuss a little bit about the different subjects that can happen in a COIL. We have a couple, actually we're across the board here in terms of what subjects these faculty teach. But some people might think that math might not be a very good COIL course, but Jafar did a calculus course. And I wonder, I think you started out with a conversation and then you had a couple assignments that were collaborative. Jafar, we don't have much time at all, but I thought, did you have successes in your COIL implementation?
Yes. So it was an optional. In my case, it was a calculus 3. So it's more of like a junior or senior level course. There are some sophomores too, but it was an optional in my class. It was mandatory. It was optional. So about 1/3 of the class joined for the COIL. And then I already, so it was with someone whom I know her already. When I was in Mississippi State, she was doing PhD at that time. when I was about to leave, she just joined. So my instructor of the calculus course back home, it was in India, by the way. It was in India, and with FGCU and Kumaraguru College of Arts and Sciences. So I know her before. I also visited her university during the summer. So we set it up. I had a workshop. I had a COIL session. So I spent like 4 days over there in her college, going through the general assignments and so on. So again, we don't have too much of time. I can give you probably 30 minutes of talk on this by myself. So it was the students know what they were expecting, and my colleague know what she was expecting. And it was first was couple of assignments. First was like introductory assignments, two of them are introductory assignments. Students get to know one another, and then there are 2 math assignments, mostly like collaboratively working, and the final one was a kind of a project. So we had over the course of 5 weeks, they had like due every week. So over the course of 5 weeks, we did that. Students, I think both side of the aisle. I think both side from here or from there, both of them benefited greatly. And I don't know, I don't know if it's a casualty or if it's a correlation. The students pretty much did in the COIL in here. Everybody passed the course, and so I don't know if it's a correlation, or is it because of the COIL? I'm not sure, because this is optional. So this was not something mandatory. So I cannot definitively say if the COIL had a significant impact, but I can say COIL definitely, from the inputs, from the feedback that I received, did have impact, especially on the multicultural understanding of one another, how to work with somebody overseas. Especially they had to, between India and United States, the time difference was about 10 hours. In sometime it's 10 and a half hours, sometimes it's 9 and a half hours. So they had to, it was very challenging for the students to find the common schedule. And then they worked together. And then I think students back in India also learned a great deal, things they were not exposed to before. I think now they are exposed to both intellectually, culturally, and critical thinking wise. They were never used to some of the assignments that I was giving it to them, and especially the project was not something they were used to. So I think they also greatly, I think, benefited. It was a benefit, but there was a lot of, again, I don't want to go into too much details, but there was a lot of hurdles in the beginning. It was a lot of challenges in the beginning, especially the timing, I had an issue because her semester started like a month and a half earlier. Our semester started a month and a half later. So we have to find a common ground. We need to make sure that whatever that I covered, that she covered, it's a math course. So it's not like, a student can pick up a topic right away. There's a lot of prerequisite material needs to be done before we get to anything. So to find a common topic at a common time was challenging. But overall, it was a great experience. Me visiting that place, it was a wonderful experience, I would say. I learned a lot, definitely. I don't know about others. I learned a lot. And I think my students enjoyed it too. It was reflective on their SPOI, and they also enjoyed it too.
Yeah. Thanks, Jafar. And I think pretty much every faculty that I know that's done a COIL implementation seems more than willing to share their experience and act as a resource for others who might be starting out. Our time's up, so I know some of you have to leave, want to leave. Does anyone have any particular questions or comments that they want to get in before we lose our practitioners and our expert, Megan? Feel free to unmute if not. Yeah, so next steps, I would say just, think about things. I think the importance of the partnership between that faculty, finding that right faculty, and coming up with ideas and keeping it simple, especially the first time around, and think about learning objectives is important. Like I said, we're here as a resource. It's relatively new to us. We started officially last year, but yeah, we're going to grow and become more efficient. We're going to have a COIL website up as a link that's related to our International Services Office. that should be ready probably within a couple weeks. So I'll let everyone here know when that comes up. But there's lots of resources out there that you'll find once you start hitting the Google. Jackie, just raise her hand.
And just one last thing, if there's anybody here that's interested in doing a COIL and doesn't have a partner and would be interested in a partner in New Zealand, when I went to the ARA Institute, one of the things that I discussed with them was setting up kind of a group of their faculty that might be interested in collaborating with some of our faculty. So before COVID happened, they'd kind of identified a group of about 10 faculty that would be interested in international collaborations with people at FGCU. So if anybody is interested, feel free to let Matt or me know, and we can kind of put you in contact. I don't know them, so you know, this would be the same process that I went through of getting to know somebody, but at least it's somebody that is interested in participating. So that's there as an option for people that maybe don't have somebody that they have already in mind.
And also, I'll quickly add, you know, two things. Number one, I think I agree with Matt. Keeping it simple is very, very important, especially if you're doing it first time. Number two, it also has professional. It also has the professional benefits too. I ended up being one of the advisors, advisory board on the university. So I think it also had, you know, professional benefits as well. I think now I'm one of the advisors on their for the entire university, for the entire college, so some sort of a guidance or advisory panel. So enjoy that as well.
Okay.
So I'm just going to jump in and say thank you so much to everyone. Appreciate the time. I'm so excited at what I'm hearing is developing at Florida Gulf Coast, and I really look forward to sort of following the progress as this grows and gets bigger. And if I can be of help along the way, Matt can share my contact info. But best of luck with all of these projects and initiatives. I hope something can develop for you in the course of the next year. And so thank you again for carving out time today.
Yeah, likewise. And I'll follow up with an email with it for everyone that hopefully will, if Megan will kick it up, maybe include her, the PowerPoint. I started recording pretty late. I realized it wasn't being recorded until about halfway through, but I do have the second half of the recording. And yeah, we'll just try to organize it and develop globally networked learning here at FGCU. So all good. Thank you very much again. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Jackie, Mary, Jafar.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And have a great weekend.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Matt, do you need me to stay on? Oh, no, that's okay. I was so happy that you popped in because I was wondering for a year what happened with the calculus class.
No, I had a class, so I couldn't come early. My class just, you know, finished around 11:30. So I tried to come in as much as proper. Then students today's the last day of classes. So students, I had to quickly send a few things out to the students. I was trying so I could come. I'm glad.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm glad you were able to, and I'm excited that it actually kind of worked, because I know last summer we were like, I don't know how this is going to fit in calc, and I didn't have any math examples, and now I have one thanks to you.
Thanks.
I have a comment. I have a quick comment, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
This has been very beneficial to me to listen to the calculus class, because I teach on two sides of the spectrum. I teach law, constitutional law, on this side of the brain, and then I teach a humanities course. I was originally thinking that the humanities course would be, it's about exceptionalities and the arts of people with disabilities. I was thinking that would be tantamount to the one I would, but I can now also, thanks to you, see that it may be beneficial to bring law, constitutional law, family law. So thank you. This has been extremely inspirational to me. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Jafar. Very interesting.
And it works.
You're welcome. And I would say
close to each other, you know, like when they're two totally different subjects, when you find that meeting point, it's really helpful.
Right.
As
right.
The same subject too. So
amazing.
It could be law. You could be working with law and business, law and history. I mean, there's all kinds of, you know, your partner doesn't also have to teach law, and that's the neat thing. And I would just say, pursue that Fulbright. I did like a Fulbright in terms of Jafar professional development. Like I got a Fulbright because of COIL work. I never would have expected that having started my career teaching Spanish. So, and I think Fulbright is receptive, from what I know, to sort of promoting this kind of virtual exchange work. So I'd like to see Fulbright do even more, but it's going to take more people sort of pushing in that direction to, I think, move that needle.
Well, I have the personal statement up and running that needs to be edited, but I'm going to go for it. But I'm going to make also concentration with this because it makes perfect sense to partner with somebody. I don't want to say on this level, on a much more personal level. And my ears perked up when I heard Fulbright, Megan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. The founder of SUNY COIL, who now is working as a consultant, his name is John Rubin, and he started COIL basically while he was on a Fulbright grant.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
So he was working with students in Belarus, and he teaches film. He came back, and they ended up like actually sending VHS tapes back and forth. He created a film together with the students in Belarus, but all of that came out of his own Fulbright experience. So it's been like connected to Fulbright from the very beginning, which is interesting too.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
We have a couple foreign language professors here. Megan, you start off with Spanish. Did you match up with an English or another like Spanish literature? What courses did you in foreign language?
It's a good question. All of our COILs ended up being in English because my students didn't have the level of Spanish to do it in Spanish.
But the course on the other side was an English course?
The course on the other side was English-Spanish translation course. Okay. And then it was also a linguistics course at one point. So we had Spanish, they were learning English, they were English studies majors in a linguistics class, working with a history class of my colleague, and then my literature students were working with translation students. There are COILs that have happened entirely in Spanish or another language. They're just not they're in the minority by far. And I didn't mention language today, and I kind of kicking myself because that's a big piece. Like, you don't want sort of this colonial approach, right, to the COIL work that we're doing. But unfortunately, so much of what is happening has to be done in English. Although there are these other examples I could point to about great work that's happening in Spanish, because that's where I'm most familiar. I don't know how much might be happening in French or other Romance languages. Yeah.
I can include that in a follow-up note that I'll send everyone about that.
Yeah, so like, yeah, there were a lot of people I noticed on the call. A couple had said in the chat that they teach Spanish, and then so my suggestion would be, if you teach, let's say, intermediate Spanish at Florida, don't just partner with like English Spanish students. Maybe you could partner with students in Germany who are intermediate Spanish. And they're all at the same level, right? Nobody's way above in terms of, because you're always going to end up going back to whatever language they're more comfortable with. Alternatively, if you're teaching, maybe it's a US intermediate Spanish class, and they're working with philosophy or religion or sort of history class in Peru, because that's happened. Right. Mm-hmm. And they read a graphic novel together, and they talk about ethical dilemmas together, and so it can be very controlled and still meet the language needs of both groups, even if one group isn't native.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So I'm gonna have to go. My daughter and the puppy are back, and they're waiting to pounce in.
Thank you, Meg.
I appreciate it. Yeah, Matt, I'll follow up. But have a good weekend, everybody. And we'll be in touch.
All right.
Okay. All right.
See you later.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, wonderful. Wonderful. Right. Thank you, Matt. This has been.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. Thanks for chiming in at the end there, Jafar. Thanks for making it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
Okay.
Have a good day, everybody.
All right, Lois, I'll be in touch about Austria.
Yes, find somebody in Austria. Yes.
I'll work on that. That's on my list.
Thanks a lot, Matt. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Hey, Min, you still there? Nick, if you're still there, thanks a lot. I thought that went really well. A lot of good energy. And yeah, as always, thanks to Lucas Center. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, no problem. Just make sure you hit stop record so that it saves properly before I end the meeting.
Okay, I'm gonna